All right. So it's election day in Virginia, Kentucky, New Jersey, Mississippi. So, yeah, those 4 states are having some elections today. But Virginia, it's kind of a big deal because we got the entire General Assembly up for re-election. And we've had a lot of people in our community chat ask the question if we would do an episode on what it is really like running for office. Like, what is it like behind the scenes? Like, we all know the cheesy commercials and everything else. And there's always questions on why do they do this? Like, why do politicians do this when they run for office? Well, today I figured in honor of election day, we would talk a little bit about why politicians do all those things that drive you nuts, like interrupt your dinner 14 times during election year in order to make sure that you vote, make sure that you get out and vote. Why do they do all of that? So we're going to talk about that and more. Plus, we might have a little bit of analysis. Christian's going to open up and prove his political prognostication skills, and not going to give predictions necessarily today, but talk a little bit about what are the real indicators. Because again, you got polls going out there and always getting it wrong, right? So what are the real indicators you should look at? So we're going to talk about all of that today, plus answer your questions, and then I need to get to the polls. So all of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Good Ranchers.
Thank you to everyone who has helped us decide the direction of this show. And like Nick said, this episode idea came from our community chat. So if you'd like to play a role in what episodes we do in the future, I hope you'll go down to the link in the description, join our community chat there. We'd love to get to know you. We have a good time there as well.
All right. As always, I am your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates for now. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens today, Christian. Stop giving me that look.
You're going to win 61-39.
I don't think so.
Oh, you gave it away, Christian.
I don't think 61-39. I'm going to give it myself. I think maybe 58, but we'll see. We'll see. With us today, my beautiful bride is not here. She's not with us today. So I guess I just lied there. Politicians. What are you going to do? She's not here today. She is a little bit under the weather. She's not feeling very good. Didn't want to get anybody sick. And so she's not here today.
Podcast must go on.
Yeah, but we still have Christian. Yay. No. We have our resident historian and political prognosticator, not to mention a mostly benevolent warlord currently in training, Christian Hines. How you doing, man?
I'm feeling obviously really nervous about today because it's going to be really, really, really close. But it's not going to be close in your race. And no, you're not going to be getting 59%. You're going to get at least 60%.
I said 58.
Okay, we heard it here. 60%. We'll see what happens later today.
We'll see. I hope so. I will say my opponent this year, very, very nice lady. And then, of course, we have our producer of producers, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking. How are you doing?
That is right. Nick, I'm doing great today. It's election day. We've had a lot of good stuff going on with the team. So I'm pretty excited. I'm really stoked.
Yeah.
Guess what just happened at midnight? For those that are listening, Nick crossed 1 million followers on Instagram on election day. What a great election day present.
That was. I'm very grateful. That was pretty cool. Also, this is the first year my son gets to vote in elections. So my oldest daughter got to vote. My son got to vote. I'm 50-50 on whether or not they voted for me.
Did he vote for you?
50-50. We'll see. He's definitely going to tell me he did. Who knows, though, what actually happened. And this is why we shouldn't have secret ballots. You should have to just tell me. No, it'll be fun. So, look, jumping right in, because we've had some people on our community chat over there on Circle. Details are in there if you're interested in joining. Ask a little bit about what is it really like behind the scenes from the campaign perspective, from actually serving and I serve in state office, but I've also had kind of a wild ride when it comes to political campaigns. So you've got your typical campaign, right? And that's usually when you have a primary for your party's nomination, or you might have a convention for your party's nomination. And then you go into the general election. And just to give you an idea of kind of the spectrum of races I've had to run, I've run unopposed, which, by the way, is the best way to do it. Hands down, best way to do it. I've run unopposed. That was my very first election cycle. Ran unopposed for the Virginia House of Delegates. I ran opposed with no convention or primary because I was already the incumbent, so nobody ran against me to challenge me for the nomination. And then I've ran for the Republican nomination before in a convention style, which was interesting because it was one of the hottest days in Virginia, and it was during COVID. Right, so that was incredibly difficult. So I had to run a race where you could barely do events. Where you had to do almost everything online. I've run a statewide race where you've got to go all over the state, and probably the most unique, I had to run a write-in. I had to run a write-in race. It was the largest, from what we can find, it was the largest write-in effort in Virginia history, and we won.
And it wasn't close either.
We won pretty handily.
This is why you're not going to get 58%, because you got like 58% in the write-in.
which just so everybody's aware, that means people have to go to the polls and write the name in. It's not on the ballot.
No, yeah, that was nuts. That was a crazy. Now I was the incumbent, and this is super embarrassing because it was a paperwork screw up by both me and the party, and it kept me off the ballot. And we kind of fought it because this stuff has happened before, and they've usually just given an extension and the whole deal. Well, I didn't get an extension. And so we had to do a full-on write-in campaign, and man, I'll tell you what it has done though. It's led other people to believe that, oh, see, it's possible. Very, very unique. I was the incumbent, right? Like it's a very, very different thing.
I'm actually glad that it happened though, because it sent a message to, quite frankly, people in both parties and also lobbyists and any other group that has an axe to grind in Richmond.
Yeah.
Either in or out of government, that like you're effectively untouchable.
Oh, that's not true.
No, hang on. Let me finish the argument, because he's going to be too humble here, but the audience needs to hear it. One of the biggest problems that we have is, quite frankly, we get people elected. Nick has never been like this, obviously, because he's always had a strong philosophical compass. But there's so many times that people say the right things, they do the right things, they get elected, and then they go to Richmond and they become squishes. They become weak. They simply want to. They're very high in agreeableness by nature of being a politician. And the problem is that whoever has their ear last before they vote on something usually gets their way, especially if there's any sort of money involved in the form of like campaign contributions, let alone like bribes. Go ask Bob Menendez how many gold bars he has in his office.
That's how you know inflation is bad, is when the politicians have to start getting their bribes in gold.
But like the reason that I bring this up is because the threat of we'll come after you in your election or your primary or your whatever hangs over so many people's heads to vote in ways that we, in the general public think this is ridiculous. Well, I mean, in Nick's case, he didn't even have his name on the ballot, and he still won with almost 60% of the vote. And so what that has effectively done is that it has sent a message to everybody in Richmond that you can come after him all you want, you can be angry at him for voting the way that his conscience directs him to all you want, but ultimately there's no sort of threat, there's no intimidation tactic, there's no anything that can convince Nick to compromise on his principles. And not that he ever has, and he never has, and which is the reason why we like having him as our state delegate here. By the way, this week is also the 8th anniversary of Nick first being elected to the House of Delegates. True. I remember that election night party where Nick and I were at the Italian restaurant in Culpeper, and we were celebrating Nick's first election. I actually posted the picture that you and I took together that came up in my Facebook timeline. I posted that in our circle chat for everybody to take a look at.
Well, and that was a crazy year too, because it was my first year running. We weren't I've been asked if 2 years before that, I had been asked by a couple people if I would consider running for office, and I said no.
Who was one of those people?
Yeah, what's that?
I think one of those people sitting at the table.
I don't know. I don't think Christian did it. Not then.
I've been asking Nick to run for office since December 2012. I've got the Facebook messages to prove.
So it wasn't. But the first time I got asked to run, I was like, no. No. I was I'd gotten out of the military. I'd moved into the area. I'd been active and involved in stuff like that. I'm like, no, I haven't been here long enough. I just didn't think it would be appropriate. And then a couple years later, Christian and some others said, hey, we want you to consider running. And it was funny at the time. I said, look, if you want to put up a page to draft me to run for office, and it actually generates some interest, because there were some issues that I had with things that were going on, and the direction the Commonwealth was going and the House of Delegates was going. And so that's how it started for me, right? It was people asking. Christian was the primary person kind of setting that up. And then, and there was a fair degree of interest in it. So I said, okay, I'll take the next step. And we had our announcement. Our announcement went really well. And the incumbent had been in for a while, and he decided to retire, and then nobody else decided to run. But here's what I'll tell you for like right off the bat. I know we have some questions, and I'll because this one is actually relevant to this, and that's from Catachrome. Question right off the bat: do you find that it is now a requirement to pull in with a PAC or the RNC, DNC? Seems to be without their support, you don't get elected, except with very few exceptions. So here's what I'll say. When you say get in with a PAC or something like that, or RNC, DNC, it really depends on what you're running for. So if you're running for local office, no, you don't really have to. In many cases, you don't necessarily have to do that. In fact, in Virginia, for instance, your local races are not partisan. So your political affiliation doesn't actually show up on the ballot. To run for state office, you almost have to either be Republican or Democrat. You can run third party. We've had people run, libertarian campaigns and stuff like that. The most I think a libertarian has ever gotten running for governor of Virginia was, I think, was it 7% of the vote one year?
It was 5 to 7. It was Sarvis in 2013.
Yeah, 5 to 7. But here's what I'll say. What it really comes down to is obviously there's kind of a wide spectrum both within the Republican and Democratic parties on what people actually believe. You can find, so yeah, I'm a Republican, and you will find people that are way to the left of me within the Republican Party. You'll find other people that we differ on various issues. It might have to do with taxes. It might have to do with education. It might have to do with criminal justice reform, whatever it is. But the reason why people usually affiliate with one of those parties is because almost nobody wins if you run as an independent or you affiliate with a third party. And a lot of people think that's a problem. And I don't know. I see multi-party democracies over in Europe and whatnot, and I don't think that they're necessarily getting better results simply because they have more political parties. When it comes to things like a particular PAC or something like that, one of the most important things you can do, if you're running at the state level, and this varies a lot by state. So for instance, I represent 80,000 people in the House of Delegates, right? In my House of Delegates district. Up in New Hampshire, my equivalent up in New Hampshire represents 1,400 people, right? So there's a massive difference. I think there's only something like 3 or 4 states where their house represents more people per delegate than Virginia. A state senator in Texas represents something like 1.2 million people. That's almost double. That's almost double what a congressional district is. So it varies widely. It also varies widely on what you can fundraise. So for instance, in Virginia, we have unlimited fundraising capability. So I can, somebody can write you a check for $1 million if they want. There's no caps. And people will say, oh, well, that's a real problem because now there's too much money in politics. Okay, well, if you put a cap in politics, you don't take the money out. The difference is the money now goes through a PAC or a party or through something else. So when you have no caps on how much you can give to an individual candidate, the money tends to go to the candidate. If you do have caps, like you do when you're running for federal office, well, then now people will max out to you, but then they'll give $50,000 or $100,000 or even more maybe to a PAC to operate on your behalf. But then legally, you're not allowed to coordinate with the PAC. So the PAC can go off and do things, say things, do whatever they want. You can't coordinate with them. And it's actually a really frustrating thing for candidates sometimes because we'll be sitting there getting blamed for something a PAC did. And you're like, I didn't tell him to do that. Oh, sure you didn't. No, legally, I can't tell him to do it.
Yeah, that was my fault. And no, literally in 2020, because I worked on a lot of the PACs in the primary when Nick was running for Congress. Yeah. That race was pretty funny. But in Virginia, though, at the state level, not federal. I mean, the reason that Nick and I worked, he was a candidate and I worked on outside groups in the primary cycle. So we couldn't talk about the race at all in the primary until I left those groups. But at the state, that's different though because that's at the federal level.
Yeah, that's
at the state level in Virginia. If we were doing the exact same thing, but Nick was running for governor, I could all day long work on all these PACs and openly talk to Nick, privately talk to Nick, and all of that would be completely legal in Virginia at the state level. But it's a completely different ballgame at the federal level.
Yeah.
Same thing with fundraising limits. There's no contribution limit in Virginia, but there is at the federal level.
But there isn't the federal. And that's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of people think, oh, those contribution limits keep money out of politics. No, they don't. They make it more confusing on where the money is going and why it's going there and what the purpose is. So
you also have to consider that if the money is going to the candidate, the money that's being spent is likely going to be spent better.
Yeah, most likely. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some PACs out there, but PACs don't, again, because PACs cannot coordinate with the candidate. I mean, there's going to be differences with respect to how the strategy is done. But I think a lot of people don't understand that. They think that they will see a PAC ad in favor of a candidate and they will automatically assume that, oh, the candidate must have coordinated with them or whatever else it is. But I will say this, that the number one issue, here's the big thing that I don't know if people realize. When you're running for office, right, especially if you're running in a competitive district, I would argue that 70 to 75% of the candidate's time is spent fundraising. That's what they do. And it's not like going to events and having dinners and stuff like that. That's actually not the most effective way of fundraising because it costs something to put that all on and you have to coordinate people and people have to be willing to drive and come there and do whatever.
Time.
Oh, it takes time. It takes money. It's phone calls. And so I will tell you right now, if you are running in a competitive race, especially at the federal level where you're talking like it's going to be a $10 to $20 million race, Monday through Friday, you are going to show up to the campaign headquarters, you're going to get on the phone, and you are going to make calls for 6 to 8 hours a day. That is what you do. And it stinks. I hated it. It was but it was one of those things where people would be like, well, it's a shame that that's what you need. Okay, well, I don't know what to tell you because it's great to have a good message. And every once in a while you'll see somebody that's not serious about fundraising and they'll say, well, I'm going to get out there and work really hard at the doors. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to work hard at the doors, which means on a good day, you're going to actually get to speak with 20 to 30 people. Meanwhile, your opponent is going to spend the same amount of time. They're going to raise however much money. They're going to be able to put out ads. They're going to be able to hire door knockers.
Yep.
And then what's going to end up happening is for every 20 people you speak to, your opponent's going to speak to 6 to 7 times that. And so who wins? Yep. Who's going to win? And
who gets to control the narrative?
Oh, yeah, big time.
There are some exceptions, though. When you have so much upswelling of grassroots support, it's hard, but you can beat out money if you have the manpower to have a strong ground game. And we see, but the thing is, those are always exceptions, not the rule. The rule usually is whoever spends more money wins. Usually, I mean, and we know this from operating for decades on the liberty side of Republican politics, because how often have our candidates outspent the establishment or moderate or liberal even wing of the party? Almost never.
Yeah. Well, and what it really comes down to as well, like, so if you're wondering why candidates are always out there asking for money, it's because honestly, if you don't have the resources to be able to hire volunteers or to hire people to knock doors, to hire people to do phone banking, to hire people to do all this other stuff, to get signs, to do all that other stuff, you lose. And that's why. And so the thing that I would say is, Thomas Sowell has this quote that we use a lot where it's, well, I'm not going to use that one because it's not exactly applicable, but the bottom line is the reason why there's so much money in politics is twofold. One, because voters respond to it. Right? Voters will say all day long, we don't want all this money in politics, but then they will vote for the person that they see on TV the most, that they see at their door the most, that they see doing the most events, that they see and having the most momentum. And so voters respond to it. And so, that's what this is. This is a marketplace. And then the other side of that is one of the ways that people engage in politics is by donating to the candidates that they support. And so it is a political expression to be able to, donate to the particular campaign that you want. So this idea that if we just got the money out, that would work. If you really wanted to get the money out of politics, like on a significant level, especially the money that people usually don't like, right? Like corporate money, PACs, if you really wanted to get that out, the only way that you could do it is the government has to have less control over the economy. I always love pointing out this stat. When Microsoft was starting to get really big and ton of money in the whole deal, early on in the 80s,
early 90s.
Early 90s, yeah. So Microsoft spent nothing on lobbyists, nothing. And then all of a sudden, Congress threatened to break them up under antitrust laws. And the next thing you know, Microsoft is spending millions of dollars on lobbyists. And that's millions of dollars that isn't going to research and development, isn't going to hiring new people, isn't going to bonuses, isn't going to, help the stockholders, nothing. What it's going to? Lobbyists, because now you have to protect yourself from government intervention.
Be proactive.
They learned a lesson.
They learned a lesson.
It was a bad lesson, but they learned a lesson.
Well, and the problem too is what ends up happening is a lot of these companies start off spending a lot of money in politics in order to keep the politicians at bay, and then they start to realize, we can use this system to our advantage. And then they start engaging in what we call regulatory capture, which is to say that they now write the regulations for the politician to carry his legislation, or they get themselves subsidies because they'll get themselves budget amendments, or back when you could do pork at the federal level, they'll do that. And so there's this. It's not that money doesn't have a perverse influence on politics, but if you really want to get away the perverse component of money in politics, you have to give the government less control over the economy. Yeah. Not just do it on the campaign side.
You said earlier, Nick, that people say that they're sick and tired of all the money in politics, but in reality, that's actually not true. And the reason why is because a lot of people will say, I'm sick and tired of all the money in politics.
Yeah.
But actually, no, because when you look at what they want politicians to do, how often do we see people say, well, I want the government to pay for education, I want them to pay for healthcare, and I want them to pay for housing, or I want them to pay for whatever it is, right? They want effectively free money. And so the reason that there's so much, and you hinted at this earlier, but I really want to stress this, the reason that there's so much money in politics, quote unquote, is because there's so much potential to accumulate power and or wealth through the political process.
Which is a shame.
If that was not the mechanism through which you could become wildly wealthy or wildly powerful, then there wouldn't be so much money in politics. For example, how much money is in politics in Liechtenstein? There's actually very little, because the Liechtenstein government, despite the fact that they're in some ways actually like an absolute monarchy, not quite an absolute monarchy, but it's actually a relatively small government. Nobody's seeking to overthrow or seize the means of power in this tiny country, because ultimately the people who live there are pretty much left alone by their own government. And you see this in smaller in governments that have a much smaller footprint, like Tennessee, for example. Much smaller footprint. The fiscal impact that politicians have on the people of Tennessee is minute compared to many other states. Yeah. And when you see how much money's flowing around the system in a state like Tennessee versus a state like Illinois or California or New York, it's a chasm.
Yeah, it gets more and more corrupt too. As the government controls more of the economy, the more corrupt it gets, because now you have less of a meritocracy, and you have more of what Ayn Rand referred to as the what was it?
Kleptocracy?
No, she called it something. It was the power of pull.
Okay.
Right. And so is this idea that your ability to make wealth is not about your ability to provide products and services in a competitive market. It's about your access to regulators and politicians and everything else. Let's go to this next question. Former Wokey White asks, should we create a law where we can opt out as the default for political ads, but have an opt-in if we want to see them? Everyone hates ads. We shouldn't be forced to see them. Okay, so I want to break this down here real quick, because this is one of those things where I think when we look at it, we say like, okay, why wouldn't we just pass a law? And there's actually a lot of good reasons why we can't, and I would even argue why we shouldn't. So when you say everyone is forced to see them, the question that I would ask is, where are you forced to see them? Is it when you're watching TV? Is it when you're watching YouTube? Is it, when you're listening to a podcast, whatever it is? How would we write that law? What we would essentially have to do is we would have to tell the people that own the news station or own the television show or the people that own the YouTube channel, you're no longer allowed to sell ad spots to politicians. You're not allowed to do it. Well, right off the bat, that adds some concerns with respect to equal protection before the law, freedom of speech, things like that. It also adds some problems with respect to contracts. Like, am I supposed to tell a business, hey, you're a business and you have airtime and you want to sell ad revenue or you want to sell ad space to this particular politician running for office? You're not allowed to do that. Right? Because that's the only way I could do it. There's no opt-in or opt-out. Like, how would you arrange that? Because usually where you see ads is you are the consumer of a particular television show or, again, radio show or whatever else it is. So there's no real way to do that without really infringing on the property rights of the people that have the radio show or have the YouTube channel or whatever else it is. And so as frustrating as it is, there's no real way to get around it, right? People can go to somebody that has access to a viewership and say, I would like to, I mean, most of us are not paying for TV, right? At least you're just network TV. Maybe you're paying for cable. Maybe you're paying for your Netflix subscription or something like that. But again, one of the ways that they generate revenue to either make it to where you don't have to pay or to keep the rates low is through advertising. And to say that a political candidate should not be permitted to buy ad space if somebody wants to sell it to them would probably be really, really problematic. But here's the deal too. When you're looking at, the whole question of who should be allowed to buy, who should be allowed to sell. I want a free market environment, right? Like, I want a free market environment where you as the customer get to pick what you want and you know exactly what you're getting. And there's no better place to do that than Good Ranchers, because Good Ranchers is all about transparency and quality. So if you're hungry right now, and I'm starving right now. I barely ate this morning.
We just got back from the gym a little bit.
Just got back from the gym, and what my body is screaming for right now is we need steak. Yep. Right? That's what we need. We need steak. We need chicken. We need bacon, because you always need bacon. Yeah. And now for a limited time, as part of their Black Friday special, if you use promo code Nick, you're going to get free shipping, right? You're going to get $15 off your order plus, and here's the deal, because check this out. When you sign up for one of the subscriptions, maybe you're a monthly subscription, maybe you're every couple months subscription, whatever it is, when you sign up for it, every time your order comes, you now have the option to choose what free meat you want to get with it. You could choose top sirloin. You could choose their chicken. You could choose their wild caught salmon.
Yep.
That's what Tina would choose right there, wild caught salmon. Or you can choose bacon, which you can then use to wrap all of the other meat you're getting in your subscription. All right. So promo code Nick, $15 off your overall order, free shipping, plus you get to pick which free meat comes with every order. That is a savings of up to $480. This is a great deal.
You can go to goodranchers.com, use promo code Nick there, or you can use the link in the description that is on the YouTube channels, is on the audio. This is one of the best ways you can help us out.
And I'm going to tell you right now, the most democratic thing you do in a free country is not voting for politicians. The most democratic thing you do is voting for how to choose to spend your money, your time, and this is an excellent investment because they're going to deliver. They're going to deliver. It's a great job. Plus, if you're looking for a gift this year, looking for a gift for that hard to shop for person.
I also hate buying gifts.
Oh my gosh.
So this is easy.
They have gift boxes now. What better way to say, I love you, I care about you, than to send them a box of meat, right? That's just nothing. That's my love language right there.
Mom, if you're listening.
Yeah.
I know what I want for Christmas.
So anyways, Good Ranchers, go over there, use promo code Nick, get those great deals. And thank you again to Good Ranchers. This is a great way. If you want to support the show, go to Good Ranchers, buy yourself some meat. You're supporting Good Ranchers, you're supporting us, and you're supporting yourself with deliciousness.
I know we've gotten a little bit off topic, but I want to get to the super chat from Jonathan. He said, you may have addressed this previously, but what do you think about state-funded elections?
Ooh, okay. So here's my problem with that. There are some countries that engage in this. I think there's even some states that engage to it to some degree. Or if you can opt out of, like, if you opt into getting state funds, you have to opt out of getting like private funds or something like that. Here's the problem that I have with it. A lot of people look at it as like, oh, well, this just makes it fair, right? Because now two candidates are essentially have access to the same amount of money. No, they don't. No, they don't. They may have the access to the same amount of money for their particular campaign, but that doesn't mean that other people don't get to campaign on your behalf. So it doesn't achieve this equity that everyone thinks it does. The other problem that I have with this is, let me get this straight. The government is going to take your money and then they're going to give it to someone in order to run for office who will then get to vote on whether or not they take more of your money. Like, is that... We actually had a delegate. And him and I go back and forth all the time. He had a bill one year for something called democracy bucks or democracy dollars or something like that. And what it was going to do is it was going to give citizens the ability to participate in politics by giving them money that they can then give to a campaign. And I remember standing up on the floor of the House of Delegates. I said, will the delegate yield for a question? I have a question. Let me get this straight. We're going to vote to take people's money in order to give it back to them, but only if they give it back to us. like that's what this concept is.
Imagine your tax dollars paying for a text that you get from a left-leaning candidate on abortion, supporting abortion. I don't want my tax dollars going to that.
Yeah, and I look on the other side of it, right? Maybe you're someone that you don't like conservatives or you don't like libertarians or whatever it is. Your tax dollars shouldn't go to be sponsoring their campaign ads. So I think I have first and foremost a philosophical problem with it, because I don't think it's a legitimate function of government for government to then use dollars to support political campaigns. And then the other problem that I have with it is I don't think it actually achieves what people think it does with respect to taking money out of politics. All right, what's the next one? Wait, where do we do? We didn't answer the one before. Go up. I'm learning. So Isaac said, I'm learning what I can do so that when I do run and get in, I will be so confrontational to the squishes and cowards who just care about money. Yeah, here's what I'll say. One of the things because people have given me crap before. Oh, wow. This is awesome. Okay. All right. Real quick.
He needs to answer this
one
first.
Let me answer this question. We'll get to this next one. Here's what I will say. If you want to get into office, the whole idea of only being concerned about money, let me say this honestly. I have people in the General Assembly that I deeply respect and enjoy working with. I have other people where we disagree with one another, but we're still cordial. And then I have other people that, quite frankly, I don't particularly care for them and they don't care for me. But I don't know any of them that is in there just because they care about money. Right. And in fact, the ones you find the most obnoxious are actually very, very ideological. They're not in it just for the money. Money influences things. Anybody that says different, it is probably not being completely honest. Money can definitely influence things within politics. But here's what I would say. The best thing that you can do if you want to be just absolutely dedicated to what you believe and do your job well based off of your principles and what you told your constituents you would do, is you have to be able to get elected and then stand by what you do, but do it intelligently, doing strategically, take the time to explain to people why you're doing what you do, do a great job on constituent services, right? Do right by the people that call your office asking you for help with things. And then you have to actually you have to be able to build a base who appreciates what it is that you're doing, knows that you're doing it, is confident that you're doing it, and will support you even when they come after you, right? Even whether it's leadership or whether it's the Washington Post or the mainstream media or whatever else, when they come after you, your base has a strong enough relationship with you and enough confidence that you're willing to do the right thing that they're going to back you, through all of that. And one of the reasons we get teased a little bit like, Nick, you spend a lot of time on social media. Well, yeah, it's because I learned very, very quickly that when the Washington Post called me up and asked for a comment, it's not because they wanted to fairly or accurately represent what I said. In fact, I've gotten to the point where people now ask, why don't you talk to the press? I'm like, because with very few exceptions, their goal is to not inform their readers on what I said and why I said it. Their goal is to, flavor what I said in the worst possible light, or to put it in the worst possible light possible, so as to, put me in a bad position. Why would I talk to somebody that doesn't have honest intentions with respect to asking me questions? And I've run into this so many times that I said, no, if I can build up a base within social media who will give me a hearing, at the very least, they will be able to hear what I actually did, what I actually believe, what I actually said from my perspective. Now, they can then go out and they can read the press, they can read what my opponents say, they can read everything else, but there's going to at least be a place where they can hear directly from me, and I'm not dependent on somebody else helping me to get out my message. And so that's what I would encourage you to do is don't forego the idea that fundraising is important for your campaign. It is, but also use the time and effort that you have to build up a good system to communicate with your constituents so that when somebody says something about you, they're like, yeah, no, that's crap. I know Nick. Right? Or I know, whatever.
Yeah. I got one question I want to bring up before we get to this incredible super chat. Kyle said, do you think having media, social, podcasts could change the way we reach audiences to be more cost effective? And to that point, I want to say that a lot of candidates want to launch podcasts, and Nick and I launched his podcast while we were in the congressional campaign. The reason we did that was because of COVID and our inability to have events, and so that was a longer form medium that we could communicate to people through. But I would say for people that are interested in running for office and expanding their digital footprint, you need to think about where the most eyeballs are for the least, for the lowest cost, and by cost I mean time investment, and that's going to be on short form media. But I wanted to comment on that, Nick, if you have any thoughts.
Sure, real quick. Daniel Clark said, "Love the mug, Nick." No, thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate the mug. When it comes to jumping on social media, here's what most people screw up and on politics when it comes to social media. They use it as nothing more than an extension for their campaign or the work that they're doing within their legislature, right, or whatever their office is. So that's all it is, right? It's politicians telling you about what they're doing. And a lot of times they're not talking about things that are just important to people on a cultural level. They're not actually opening it up about their own stuff with their family. And I don't mean a fake way, like, oh, let's put the family all together, perfectly dressed, and let's stand here and just sew at the golden hour and take a picture. No, it's about like sharing stories and actually just connecting with people on a real level and not being worried about, oh my gosh, well that didn't. I have people all the time, like in my social media, go, well, this seems somewhat unbecoming of an elected official. I'm like, well, if you want to stiff for an elected official, go for it. Like, that's not me. And so far, my constituents don't seem to mind. And if they do mind, that's fine. They can get rid of me, right? This is not supposed to be like a lifelong career. This is supposed to be a term of service that you do in order to hopefully, get something done, accomplished on behalf of your constituents and for the things that you believe in. And if you can't be yourself while doing that, well, then maybe you shouldn't do this. And so what I would tell people is don't think that you're going to instantly come out and run for office and set up a podcast. And no, you need to, when you're operating on social media, what you need to be thinking about is what are you providing to people?
Yeah.
And too many people in elected office think I'm doing this for what it does for my office or what it does for my campaign.
The only reason they do it.
Yeah. It's like, no. What is it doing for the people you want to talk to? And if you're not thinking about what they get out of this, and what the benefit it is for them, then it's going to fail. You're going to get the typical, 1,000 to 2,500 followers that, one point followed your page because you were running for office and you were mildly interesting, and now
I don't even have 2,500 followers. Maybe I should run for office.
Okay, this super chat is gold. Go ahead, Nick.
Dog. Man, this is kind of mean toward Brett.
Oh,
Dog-faced Pony Soldier says, this is for Hamilton and Christian. There was some mention of disappointment about Brett Cooper getting encaged. Don't be sad, you dodged a bullet. Her Good Ranchers segues are trash.
I don't think that her transitions for Good Ranchers are trash. I don't agree with that, but that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the super chat. Like, look, we're fans of Brett. I mean, I'm not as big a fan as like Christian and Hamilton were. Like, they were
not anymore.
They were trying to
not anymore.
They were. She was definitely on the wifey scale until she got engaged. Somebody swooped in there on you guys. Turns out you got to actually like make contact. It's.
Tina did warn me that I will never meet a woman if I just stay in my room or stay in my house all day long. So, she remains undefeated in that predictions thus far.
All right, Nick, I have a quick question for you before we segue into the rest of the show. We were talking about fundraising and all of that, but what do you think goes through the mind of someone who's wondering about whether or not they want to run for office? Why do people choose to run for office, and what are some misconceptions they might have before running for office that you've seen?
So I will say there's two types of like in general categories. So for instance, there's a guy running for Virginia 7th District, Cameron Hamilton. good friend, really like him. I'm totally supporting him.
Great guy.
Yeah, great guy. Why did I think he would be a good candidate? So here's the interesting part. The reason why I thought he would be I thought he'd be a good representative. Right. So that was the first question I had to ask is would this person be a good representative? And what does a representative do? Well, a representative tells you exactly what they believe, why they believe it, and you have confidence that what they believe represents what you believe. And so this is someone that you think is going to be able to go into difficult, confusing, potentially high stakes situations and make good decisions. He never once asked me about running for office. Like I've known him for several years. He shows up. He works hard for other candidates. He gets out there. Like wonderful family. His wife Karen is incredible. Kids are wonderful. Like, but they get out there and they work. They volunteer. They put in the hours. They do the job to help people to fight for the things that they believe in. Never once asked me about running for office. Never once. I went to him. I asked him, like, man, would you be willing to consider this? Well, I always tease him that I called his house and I wanted to talk to Karen and he picked up the phone first and just assumed I meant him. So, but no, he was the sort of guy where I've seen the values, I've seen the work ethic, and he's good. I have some other people and God bless them. They will every once in a while come up and this is the higher the office they're looking to run for, the more, this is going to sound mean, the more diluted they are about what is actually going on. So every once in a while I will see someone that will come up at a local committee meeting or an event and be like, I really want to run for office. I just feel compelled. I feel like the need, my country, is in peril. And so I'm going to run for governor. Dude, who are you? Like, this is the first time I've seen you anywhere doing anything. Do you have any conception of what it is that you're running for, what this is going to take? And I don't say that to be mean. I say that because if you really are as concerned about saving your commonwealth or your state or your country, as you say, then my question is where have you been? The fight did not start yesterday. Like, I said this once to somebody. I was like, stop telling me how hard you're going to fight and start showing me your scars, dude. Because the fight didn't start yesterday. Fight's been going on. So have you been in it? Or did you just suddenly decide that now that I'm retired or now that I have the extra time or now that I'm bored and my kids are out of the house, now I'm going to run for office and save the country? Oh, well, gosh, thanks for showing up, Sparky. We kind of needed you beforehand. Where were you? Where were you when it was doing the grunt work? Right? I guess you were too good to put out signs. You were too good to knock doors. You were too good to phone bank. You were too good to do any of that, but you're good enough to be governor. Okay. I'm going to go with no. How about that? And again, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm just saying that when somebody comes up to me and says, I really want to run for office, if I've never seen them before, that's my first question is, where you been? Where you been? And maybe they got a good answer for it and maybe they don't, but where you been? Because this doesn't start off with when I ran for office, I had been the chairman of our local committee. I had been a precinct coordinator. I had been just a volunteer. Like, I remember showing up and I would just put out the chairs for the meeting and I put the chairs away from the meeting. And, and how do I help? Like, my goal wasn't to run for office. My goal was to help. And so that's one of the things that I look for when people are saying, like, considering running for office is like, what have you done? What are your qualifications? And have you put in the grunt work? Or are we all just supposed to, like, oh gosh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you wanting something from, the rest of us, even though you've never contributed anything when it comes to doing this. So I would say, look, if you're serious about running and you really feel like the calling to do that and you think it's something you want to do, fight in the trenches before you offer yourself up to lead the charges, if that makes sense. Have some skin in the game. I don't think that's too much to ask. And again, that doesn't mean you have to be a party leader or whatnot, or you have to wait your turn. I'm not saying any of those things. All I'm saying is that, again, if you're going to say you're going to fight in this arena, I'd like to know where you've already been fighting in the arena before you propose to lead something.
It's also very important for someone to have the context of working in local party politics before running for office, because it's very difficult to understand the playing field without having spent that time doing the grunt work.
Well, I don't disagree. That's one method. There's other methods too. Like if you're someone that doesn't necessarily want to be immersed in the party politics, well, there's other ways that you could have been supporting your community and working for the values that you care about. Maybe you were volunteering in another aspect of policy or positions that are important to you, right? Maybe there's other things that you learned, but the number one thing that we learned I kind of look at it this way. Let's put it in the best possible light. You have somebody that is they're passionate and they're serious. They want to work. They want to hold the deal. They want to run for office. All of a sudden, like putting them in a position to run is a little bit like somebody come up to you. It's like having an 18-year-old come up to you and be like, I really want to fight for my country. Okay, well, we're not going to send you to basic training. We're not going to send you to advanced individual training. We're not going to give you anything. Here's a rifle. There's the enemy. Have fun.
Yeah.
Right, you're setting them up for failure as well.
I know plenty of countries that actually do that.
Yeah.
So luckily, the United States is not one of them currently.
Yeah. Well, but part of it is it's about understand. We always stress this in special forces, right? One of the biggest things they beat into your head every time you did anything was understand your operational environment. Understand your operational environment. I joke with people that the biggest thing that prepared me to run for office was actually being a Green Beret, because as a Green Beret, you learn unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency, and it's amazing how well those things relate to domestic politics. But there's this idea of if you understand your operational environment, if you understand the things that you want to do, and if you understand how to properly and effectively articulate them to a broad audience, these are basic things to start off with. And there's a lot of mechanics within running a campaign. Like I said, you can have the best message possible. You can have a great background. You can have done all the work. But if you don't fundraise, well, then nobody's going to hear it, right? Or small people are going to hear it. The other thing is surrounding yourself with good people.
Yeah.
I will say right now, the consultant class in politics, it can be a real problem. Because there is a lot of money to be made in political campaigns. And look, running a political campaign is a skill set, right? This idea that, well, I'm just going to pick somebody that is my best buddy. Like, okay, well, if they don't know anything about doing this, they're probably going to make a lot of stupid decisions.
And waste money.
Yeah. However, there's a lot of consultants that will also waste your money because they've set up a whole network or empire for themselves. And every time they buy anything, you're getting upcharged and you don't even know it because they're the ones controlling how the money is spent. So you better pick people. Your general consultant is your three people: your general consultant, whatever attorney you're going to have or treasurer to run your fundraising, and your campaign manager. Those three people are critical because they're going to select the rest of the staff. And if you don't trust them, and if they don't believe in not just you as a candidate, because there are some people that will work for you not because they believe in you. They'll work for you because they believe in your ability to fundraise, because that's how they get paid.
Yep.
And so they will support a candidate because that candidate is a good fundraiser. And I've sat down with consultants before where I've said, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what I will do. This is what I will not do. Now, if you don't like the way I say something and you want to advise me to say the same thing differently, I'm willing to listen to that, right? Like, I'm willing to take advice. I'm not willing to trash my principles. I'm not willing to throw them out. Like, I ran in a very, very competitive race where they're like, well, Nick, the life issue is going to be, okay, well, great. I'm pro-life. And if I'm asked about it, I'm going to explain why I'm pro-life. I'll go into all of that. Now, if you want to advise me on effective ways to say that in a difficult campaign, sure. But if you're going to tell me, don't mention it or don't say it or change your position, that's not happening. If you don't like that, maybe this isn't a good match. No hard feelings.
Yeah. That brings me to a question, Nick, that I wanted to propose to you. There are definitely different stages of a campaign. You've got pre-primary, post-primary, and those two situations are very different. You are speaking to two different groups of people.
Yeah.
So how...
It also depends on the process. A primary versus a convention is also different.
Yeah, versus a firehouse primary versus a mass meeting. I mean, there's like,
what should our people know about that?
So if you want to run for office, one of the things that you need to understand, and one of the reasons why it's important to, like, if you're going to run as a member of a party, and if you want to win, you're gonna do that. I'm sorry, people don't like to hear that. I would love for someone to prove me wrong. Can I just say that right now? I would love for someone to prove me wrong, but nobody has yet. So, one of the things you need to understand is, how does that party determine its method of nomination for its nominees? Some states are open primaries, which means anyone can vote in them. Some states are closed primaries, which means you have to be a member of that party to select that member. Now, I will say that some people are like, oh, open primaries are good because everyone should get to vote. All it does is open it up the whole world for mischief, because what you're essentially doing is inviting the other party to select your nominee. That doesn't make any sense. A political party is ultimately a private organization, and it should have the right to select its candidates, but it should be an open and transparent process within its membership. Right, that's the part where a lot of people get mad, is how shady it can get within the party apparatus. But you should find out what it is. Is it a convention? Is it a primary? Because there's different strategies for these things, right? And you might need a different campaign manager to run a convention versus a primary. Because for a convention, you got to convince people to actually show up and spend the entire day somewhere in order to vote for you. And there might be multiple rounds of voting. Right? If it's just a state-run primary where all they do is show up to the polls like the way they normally do, that's a different strategy. If it's a party-only primary, that's a different messaging strategy than if it's an open primary. And then once you get into the general election, sometimes people will have one campaign staff for the party nomination and a different campaign staff for the general, because it's two different strategies. Yeah. Now, I will say, I want to say this, because this is one thing that kind of cracks me up. There's been a lot of money spent on what is the most effective type of campaigning. So put fundraising aside for a second. What is the most effective type of campaigning? The most effective is the candidate speaking to a voter. That's the most effective. That's the biggest bang for your buck, right? The second most effective is a representative of the campaign or the candidate speaking to a member. So that's usually door knocking. Way down, like at the bottom of the list, yard signs. And the only reason I'm going to say this is because the party faithful get so mad when you don't have, why don't you have your signs out? Why don't you have your signs out? Now listen, I didn't say signs were worthless.
I'll say signs are worthless.
But they are nowhere near as valuable as people think they are. It's a way of kind of like rallying the troops that are already rallied, that are already going to vote. Now, again, there's some value in that. I'm not completely, but what I tell people all the time is if you're really serious about helping a candidate, it's not a yard sign, it's door knocking or phone banking. And people don't like to do that because it takes you out of your comfort zone. It stinks, right? Unless you're like a real estate agent, you probably don't like going around and just talking to random strangers that you've met for the first time. But it really is the most valuable.
Yard signs are kind of like advertising on TV. When they come up, people ignore them.
Yeah.
And if there are yard signs on the side of the road, you just don't look at them.
That actually, I disagree with that, Hamilton. We have studies that show that TV ads, especially negative TV ads, actually do move the needle. Yard signs have statistically no impact whatsoever. That's why I said that, like, I will go out there and say yard signs are a complete waste of time. Unless you're running a write-in campaign. In which case, they're arguably the most important thing that you could possibly spend your money on.
The most valuable thing that we purchased on our campaign when we had to do the write-in was we had thousands of pens made that said write in, and it showed you how to spell my name. Mm-hmm. And so as people were coming up to the polls, we wouldn't say, please vote for so-and-so. We'd say, do you know about the write-in campaign, for whatever? Yes, I already know. Okay, here's a pen. You're going to need this to fill out your ballot. And it has that was the best purchase that we made for that was that pen. Oh my gosh.
But TV, the reason that there's two reasons that TV ads get so much, out of the total pie of a campaign's expenditures, depending on the race, obviously, small race for the House of Delegates, unless it's like one of the highly competitive ones in like the Richmond metro area, Northern Virginia or something like that. Usually not a lot of TV spending, right? But when you get into higher races like governor, senator, president, obviously, huge amount of the budget is spent on TV ads. And the reason why is because they do move the needle. There's two reasons, though. Not only do they move the needle, but consultants get a way higher cut of the pay than they do in other forms of expenditures, like mail, for example, let alone things like door knockers and stuff like that. This is why, like, a lot of the liberty-oriented groups that operate in Republican politics that usually has to spend more time fighting establishment Republicans or left-wing Republicans, just as much as they do fighting Democrats in the general election, a lot of things that they spend money on is actually door knocking. And the reason why is because you can get more bang for your buck. If you're a smaller organization, let's say that your budget is $1 million, but your opposition's budget is $5 million. Well, they could spend $1 million or $2 million on TV ads. You can't. But if you pour all your resources into door knocking and you can get a bunch of like college students, and if you're a liberty-oriented Republican, your base is probably younger than if you're establishment access-oriented Republican that's well into their career. A lot of those people are like in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. The liberty-oriented wing of the Republican Party is much younger.
Yeah.
And so those people are much more able to door knock. And so the comparative advantage that people like Nick and I have within the party is we could probably have an easier time finding door knockers than we can finding a bunch of donors to give us money to run super expensive TV ads with our consultants.
Yeah. If I was going to advise someone running for office right now, the first thing I would do is I would look at the race and give them an honest assessment on whether or not they could actually win. There's a lot of people that they have this belief that, oh, if people just hear my message. Sorry, dude. If you're in a D+20 district or an R+20 district or whatever it is, and you're not running on that ticket, you're not winning, man. I don't know what to tell you. It's just probably not going to happen.
Well, here's a question then: should someone run for that seat?
So it depends. It depends on what you're running for. Right. So sometimes on the local level, it may be fine. A board of supervisor's seat, a school board seat, whatever. If you're running for a seat that you know you probably can't win, there's still a strategy behind that. And part of what it is that if you run in a district that's impossible to win, what you do is you keep a part of their efforts and their money in their district because they have an opponent. Whereas if they just ran unopposed, they would raise money and then send it to other districts. Right, that's
if
one.
There's a statewide race too. There's a reason to do it because one of the things, and this is why increasingly both parties here in Virginia have increasingly tried to run candidates everywhere, even in places they can't win. Like Republicans have tried to run in Northern Virginia, like in Fairfax, which I mean we don't win a single seat in Fairfax anymore. This ain't the 1990s. Likewise, Democrats try to run people even in Southwest Virginia, and again, this ain't the 1990s. They're not winning anything down there. No. But the reason why is not because we think we're going to win anything in Fairfax or they think they're going to win anything in Southwest Virginia. The reason why is because when the gubernatorial election comes around or the U.S. Senate election comes around or whatever the statewide election is, there's a chance that you running in your House of Delegates district or congressional district there can help juice the turnout for your side in that district to help us with the statewide race.
Yes.
Not with obviously the race that you yourself are probably going to lose.
But if you can move the needle a couple points in your district, that's huge. That's massive. So no, there's a reason to run in those semi-impossible districts. You just have to be cognizant of why you're running and what your mission is. Inigo Montoya asks, does it seem that it changed because we lost the art of actual intellectual debate? I will say this, it's amazing how there really are very few like what we would call traditional political debates anymore. Everything's done in kind of like soundbite answers. I don't think I've ever participated in what you would consider to be like a debate like Lincoln Douglas debates. They're always candidate forums. And what that means is they ask each candidate the same exact question and then you each get like a minute to respond. There's not like this series of the candidates asking each other questions or rebuttals. That just doesn't happen the way it used to. And I do believe that's a shame. But I also think it's people responding to what voters actually want, and voters don't want to watch a 2-hour Lincoln Douglas style debate.
I do.
They and at least this is what the research is. Maybe it's wrong, but a lot of the people that do this research do it because they're selling ads for this thing and they know it keeps people watching. And so debates really have turned into just a series of like fireworks. Now, I will say this, what's been fascinating to watch on places like YouTube is there's a lot more when it isn't overtly political in the form of like a campaign, when it's just talking about maybe a weighty issue or it's talking about a particular policy, people will listen to, Jordan Peterson and others talk about it for an hour, 2 hours. And they like the dialogue. People love watching Joe Rogan interview people, in part because it's not that Joe Rogan doesn't have an opinion on various issues, but one, he listens to his guests. He allows them to answer. He doesn't ask obvious gotcha questions. He asks questions that he wants the answer to. I'll tell you another guy that does this really well is Sean Ryan. I did like a 4-hour thing with Sean Ryan. And Sean Ryan, when he asks you a question, whether he agrees or disagrees maybe with you or your analysis, your position, he wants to know what you think and why. And so it's interesting to listen to because it's not overtly hostile. And so I do think that we've lost some of that. I'm not sure on the best way to get back to it. Maybe it's just rolling the dice and demonstrating more of it. I know they've asked for us to do more stuff where we might have people to come on that disagree. It's honestly, it's kind of hard sometimes too to like get people in studio, and like especially when your studio is like in your house, you don't necessarily want to just invite people into your home. But I will say this, I've never turned down a forum, in my district, because I've always at least wanted to give people the opportunity to hear from me and somebody else on the same topic. There's another thing I wanted to get here real quick. Oh gosh, where was it? Did I lose it already?
Super Chatter's question.
It was just a question. Somebody asked, negative ads. What were my take on negative ads versus positive ads that focus on the candidate? Here's what I'm going to tell you. I think Christian will back me up on this. Negative ads work. I've heard so many people tell me, I hate the negative ads. Maybe you do. Maybe you're the individual that does. But there has been millions upon millions of dollars put into market research, and negative ads work far more effectively than positive ones do.
Whose fault is that?
The voters are the ones deciding who wins elections. This is one of the things about democracy, right? And I get it. We live in a constitutional republic, but we use democratic processes to select our representatives. And ultimately, people can say whatever they want. What everyone's looking for is what moves the needle on election day. That's what they're looking for. And they focus group this repeatedly, and the negative ads work. I'm not saying I like that. I'm saying that's the reality. Now, is there any area where positive ads work? Positive ads have the greatest effectiveness early on in a campaign where you are introducing yourself to the audience. So if you can do a positive ad where it's an introduction of who you are, who your family is, maybe an experience that you had, something like that. It's not that they're worthless, but as the campaign goes on and you get closer to election day, the reason why everything goes negative is because it's a lot easier to convince someone why they shouldn't vote for someone else, right? And that's what everyone's looking to do. The reason why they do it is because it works. And there have been candidates that have decided, no, I refuse to believe that. I'm just going to run a positive campaign. And you know what they call those people? Not congressman, not senator, right? Like, so again, the electorate, if you want to move the needle on something like that, then you have to vote for the people that actually campaign that way.
Yeah. There's a question here. From Isaac, he said, is a political science class or degree completely worthless for politics? I'd like to answer this real quick, Christian, before you jump in here. As someone who did, explore the idea of majoring in government, I actively chose not to and chose to go more of the digital route in college. And I found that skill set that I built in college, whether it be through classes or activities that I participated in, has benefited me greatly on campaigns, for nonprofits, for what we do now. So I think there are varying skill sets, and it doesn't always have to be within government. Now, Christian, I know you wanted to jump in here, so go ahead.
Short answer, yes, Isaac.
That what? It is worthless?
It's worthless, yes. Long answer, yes, but it's complicated.
Still pretty short.
Here's what I mean. Overall, is the degree worthless? Yes, absolutely. I say this as somebody who literally has a degree in political science. Yeah. But yeah, thanks, Nick. I was going to major in history, the other worthless degree, until I met Nick and I decided, no, literally the story of my whole life, I wanted to major in history. I wanted to be like my father. Except not teach marketing and business and teach history, because I was obsessed with history my whole life, still am. And then I met Nick in high school and decided, okay, I'm going to completely change the orientation that I wanted to go with my life and go into politics. And so then I majored in political science in college, and then kept bugging Nick to run for the House. I remember the oldest Facebook messages that I have with Nick from literally 11 years ago. It's crazy thinking about that, of me asking him to run for the House of Delegates. And apparently it took 3 years to get him to say yes. But the degree itself, okay, so what do I mean with this rant? The degree itself is worthless, but it is true that you could argue some of the things, depending on where you're getting the degree from or how you're getting the degree, it is true that some of the things you can learn in the process of getting the degree actually might be useful.
Yeah.
And so, for example, Some of the people that some of the people that I met in the process of getting that degree, I've known ever since. Like, for example, one of my best friends, Tyler, who I was the best man at his wedding just 2 months ago. He and I met in college when we were both working on getting our degrees. And we cultivated a relationship in that process that became, basically a networking opportunity for both of us when we graduated. And now Tyler works in politics just like I do. We work in totally different fields, obviously, but
I think the networking component is the most valuable.
The networking component is very valuable. Every now and then there actually are some benefits in terms of, depending on like the class that you're in or who the professor is or something like that, there can be some benefits. But overall, I can say this: nobody has ever hired me. And I've worked in politics literally my entire adult. Actually, I've worked in politics since before I legally even became an adult. I've worked in politics my entire life, is outside of being, working at the movie theater in high school, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, I've worked in politics my whole life. Nobody has ever once asked me, "Do you have a degree in political science?" before they hired me.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's instead the questions that they ask me are, what type of skill sets do you have? Are you good with numbers? Do you understand anything about data? Do you have any experience when it comes to mail? Do you know anything about creative? Do you know anything about door knocking or organizing or messaging or political marketing? Like, these are all skills, many of which I developed after I left school.
Yeah.
Like becoming a professional political marketer, understanding how the mail process works. That's a whole nother field. Understanding email. Understanding like what should go into a subject line, where to put the ask.
To give you an idea, I had a group working for me, good group working for me. They could not write email script in my voice, right? And understand when emails go out for a campaign, some emails go out like in the voice of like a concerned voter or of an organization, and then some go out as in your voice, right? It's like you sending the email to your constituents or to your potential voters or whatever it is. And a lot of candidates will just say, "Hey, I pay you to worry about this. Just write whatever you think will work." I am not one of those candidates. And we
wish he was.
Oh, they do. I hate clickbaity stuff. Like, just absolutely, I hate it. I don't like it. And they used to fight with me back and forth. And I finally just said, I'm like, look, if you hire Christian Hines to write the script for me, he can write in my voice. He can write it. He will say things like, we know each other well enough. We know what each other believes. I like the way he writes. Hire him. And so here's the funny part. Initially, they hired him. And I know they did this. And again, I'm talking about, this is a group I love. They do really good work.
You're trashing Dustin?
No, I'm not trashing Dustin. I'm not trying. But they hired him, and then they would send me like the same sort of script, but they would have Christian email it to me. And I remember getting on the phone and being like, I'm not going to say who put him on the phone. I said, "Did you honestly think you could send me the same crap, but from Christian?" And I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I guess this is good." No, let him write it. And as soon as and because the approval process for this was, I would make them send it to me before I would approve for it to go out. And so it was they needed like a 30-minute turnaround. They were getting like a 6-hour turnaround. And it was driving them nuts. And then I would go back with corrections. No, take this out, do this, don't say this, that's lame. Like stuff like, as a hardcore Green Beret combat veteran, I'm like, you ever do that again, you're fired. Like, don't ever do that crap again.
Clickbait works though, and you know why? In my previous job working in political marketing, Dustin, a good friend of mine, knows this story quite well. We collect emails from everywhere you could possibly. We collect emails even from like political parties operating in Europe, because a good headline is a good headline. A good, it's called copy for a reason, as one of my former bosses likes to say. And when I guarantee you, this one email that had the highest open rate. Open rate is whether or not somebody actually clicks on the email and opens it, right?
Yeah.
I guarantee you the highest, and usually open rates for emails are like, sub 20%, right?
Yeah.
The highest open rate for an email, I guarantee you I've ever seen in my entire life, was a congressional candidate running in Florida. I believe this was last cycle. She was running in the Republican primary. And her Email subject line was, yes, I was a bikini bodybuilder. I guarantee you that had over a 50% open rate.
Oh my God, the country's doomed. The country's doomed. All right, let's get to some super chats. Ellen, not Sarah Lee. She's one of our regulars. Thank you very much, Ellen. She goes, I believe it's always better to throw your weaknesses out there on the table, then no one can come at you. It is an interesting strategy. I would tell you that there's a particular race in Virginia right now where the candidate did not put out the thing that they did, but it definitely got out the thing that they did, and it was pretty bad. I think it kind of depends. Like there are some weaknesses that you might possess where people are going to tell you might not want to run. But I will say this. Overall, I tend to think you're actually correct. And this follows up with our second super chat here. People will believe everything bad they hear about you in an instant and question everything good they hear about you. There's a lot of that in politics, and honestly, it's for good reason. There's a lot of skepticism within politicians, and that's appropriate because essentially you're giving someone the ability to cast votes, or if you're voting for someone for like an executive branch office to execute laws. And one of the things that drives me nuts is whenever politicians say, all we're asking, dude, once they're in office and they take a vote, the government doesn't ask, the government tells, and the government punishes for noncompliance. And so you should be very skeptical about the motivations of the people that are going to represent you. One of the things that's really funny, I have this story. I had this boss, good guy, but let's just say in his Army days, he had some really interesting stories. He had some interesting stories that 20 years ago would have completely disqualified you from ever running for political office. And I remember we're all sitting at his house one day, and he's like, and again, we knew these stories, and good guy. And he's like, one day I'm going to be president. And we're like, dude, there's no way you're going to be president, man. Like we know there's no way it would get out. Like, no, I'm going to be president. And like that, man, he's out of his mind. There's no way he could run for any office, much less president. And then when Donald Trump got elected, we're like, holy crap, he might be president one day. Because Trump had a lot of, people say skeletons in the closet. He had skeletons. They just weren't anywhere near the closet. Yeah, they were out there in the open. And so there is an element of that. Now, I will say this. I do think that there's something kind of sad about the idea that it almost seems like there's nothing that prevents you from being an acceptable candidate for political office. And that's not because I don't believe in redemption or forgiveness or understand that people make mistakes. Certainly, we've all made mistakes to some degree or another. But I don't know that it's a good thing. I don't know that it's a good thing that now people as long as you're just honest about all the crap you did. We had a delegate in Virginia that did that. He went on Twitter and said, here's all the crap my opponent's going to say about me. And after I got done reading all of them, like, holy crap, dude, you should not be in public office.
And he wasn't for much longer.
Yeah, he ended up finally losing, but in a primary. But it was like, holy crap, man. Yeah, if you've done all this is pretty damn bad. This is not a good look for your kids or anybody else. And now you want to get in here and be in a position of public trust, making policy decisions that are going to affect 8.3 million Virginians.
And the interesting thing is politics also attracts people who may not have the most
scrupulous,
well put together morals.
Yeah. And Ellen asked another question. She goes, Nick, that's why negative ads work, right? Even if they aren't true. So here's the thing to understand. Most negative ads are not unveiling some sort of secret about you. Most negative ads are not like, oh my gosh, he abandoned his first family, right?
He's an extremist.
Yeah, most negative ads are basically painting your policy positions in a negative light. So I had somebody run $250,000 worth of ads. I had a fellow Republican run probably $250,000 worth of ads saying that I was a California liberal. And it all had to do with a variety of votes on like stuff having to do with criminal justice reform. And what was fascinating is that if you actually look at our scores from things like the American Conservative Union or Club for Growth, my scores are significantly, noticeably higher than his. But it didn't matter. He was running the ads. So people will lie sometimes, or they will misrepresent your position or your values, or things like that. I had another opponent. She probably dropped, I would say, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 to $2 million on attack ads, saying that I didn't care about kids because of a vote I took in the General Assembly, and And once you listen to me to explain the vote, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Even if you may have disagreed with my position, you realize I didn't take that vote because I hated children, right? Like I took the vote because I thought this was an improper mechanism.
And it's also the consultants that are the ones encouraging the candidate to go so negative.
Absolutely. Hamilton is totally right there. But the reason why is because, first off, consultants want to get paid. But second off, consultants also want to win.
They need the track record.
They need the track record. And I mean, look, people say that they don't like negative campaigning, but it works. And people have been doing negative campaigning since Jefferson versus Adams in 1800. Go look at what Thomas Jefferson had to say about John Adams and vice versa.
Brutal.
It is brutal what they said about each other. This is nothing new. It's an inherent feature of the democratic process. And it's going to be with us as long as we have elections. So, I mean, honestly, I think that people are kind of upset about the wrong thing. Like there's still people who think politicians are going to save us. There's still people out there that think that we're going to somehow like vote our way out of a lot of these problems. And look, some of these problems you can vote your way out of. I mean, there are some elections where, you know, a very localized problem, yeah, you're going to be able to vote your way out of, you know, a problem when it comes to like a debate over a local noise ordinance or something like that. Yeah, voting your board of supervisors elections or town council elections. But like when you're talking about some of the big existential things that you hear about on repeat in the 24-hour news cycle, everything about Capitol Hill or the White House or something like that, we've gotten to a point now where increasingly people, I think, are starting to wake up and realize that DC is effectively doomed. And to you know, paraphrase myself, like, you know, DC is effectively doomed, and the political process there is effectively like broken in a permanent way. And at that point, you have to start figuring out, okay, so if solutions aren't going to be coming out of DC and instead you're only going to see problems coming out of DC, then where will you see solutions come out of? And this is a reoccurring theme that we've talked about on this podcast. There's two ways that I think solutions will actually be found. One is through the zombie apocalypse. No, I'm just kidding. One is at the state level.
Yeah.
I actually still have some faith that states, maybe, I don't think it's guaranteed. I think it's a big maybe. But I think that states can step in and fill the void when we actually do get to the zombie apocalypse in DC, right? When everything implodes, the sovereign debt crisis that we all know is coming, all of that stuff, right? And so I actually think that state level politics is in some ways way more important than federal level politics. And if you want proof of it, consider this fact. Do you remember this thing that came out of China a few years ago? It was called COVID-19.
Whoa.
Yeah, you can't say that on the YouTube.
Oh, you can't say that on YouTube?
I have no idea what you're talking about. Did you say Cover?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was this thing that came out of China a few years ago. You might have heard of it. But anyway, when the entire world like went to hell in 2020 and everything was being shut down, they were blocking you from being able to go to work. They shut down the churches. They shut down, the airports. They shut down,
but not the ABC stores.
Yeah, they shut down everything but the ABC stores, right? And just the entire country ground to a halt. Well, who imposed all the lockdowns? Who imposed all the shutdowns?
Yeah.
Who imposed all the restrictions? Who did all of the COVID tier? Who was dumping sand in skate parks in Santa Monica, California? It was not the federal government. It was your state government that was doing that.
Yeah.
It was our Democrat governor in Virginia, Ralph Northam, who decided that he's going to shut down the entire economy in Virginia and legally prevent people from going to work or going shopping. It was Democrat governors in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, California, New York, Washington State, Illinois that shut down their economies. It was not the federal government that did it. So if you want proof right there that in many ways state governments are more important than federal governments, we have an example from just a few years ago of this. Yeah. So that's one reason why states matter more. The other way that solutions are going to be coming about, and this is something we've talked about quite a lot on this podcast in multiple episodes, is that solutions are going to be found outside the political process. This is why we're so big into things like intentional communities. This is why Nick and Hamilton are so into things like homesteading. Unfortunately, I'm more of a shut-in, so I'm not as interested in it, although I do have some background with it with my parents. But the reason that we stress those type of things, like intentional communities, like, be around like-minded people, get involved in homesteading, get involved with any of these like organizations or interests that get you with like-minded, liberty-loving, conservative-oriented, not blue-haired woke idiots, right? The reason that we stress this is because ultimately a huge chunk of the solution, if not an absolute majority, is going to be coming from outside the political process, not within the political process, and certainly not within Washington, D.C. So by all means, go and vote, get involved, and especially at the state level. And I don't even mean that sarcastically like I do at the federal level.
I want to see a revolution of state legislators get elected to get rid of all property taxes.
That will never happen.
Well, I will say that the state elections are really important. Like, and the one we're having this year in Virginia is actually, I'm never one of those guys that gets out there and say this is the most important election of our lifetime. Like, I just don't say that stuff. But I will say that this will be only, I think, the second time since Reconstruction that you could actually have unified government in Virginia, and that would be pretty significant, right? So it's you can have significant, you can have far more, if you're conservative leaning, you'll have far more impact in the state elections here in like Virginia, for instance, today than you can on a lot of other stuff. There's one other thing I wanted to kind of get to today, and this kind of goes on the other side of when we look at political polling. A lot of people are kind of furious with the polls getting it wrong, or feeling like the polls are being used to manipulate voters to think in a particular way. And what I wanted to do was kind of give some insight to people on what are the indicators that you should be watching. Now, we're not going to get into specific elections this cycle, right? What we're going to do right now is talk a little bit more about what actually matters when you're looking at trends within politics.
Number one is yard signs.
Yeah.
There's a direct correlation between yard signs and vote
losing.
count. Yeah.
So Christian does a lot of work on this. He does it professionally. I mean, he's put a lot of time and effort into it. And so, and one of the things that he's really kind of developed is looking at modeling and stuff like that for identifying like, okay, what makes a district competitive? What makes a race competitive? And all of those things. So the next thing I want to do is talk a little bit about, like Christian, if you could, what are some things that people put a lot of value in that they probably shouldn't when they're looking at elections? And what are some of the things that they're probably not even thinking about that they should be looking at when it comes to like predicting outcomes?
I mean, the obvious one is yard signs. I say that jokingly, but there's some truth to that. And Nick, there's some truth to that. How many times, Hamilton probably knows this as well. How many times have you gone somewhere in public and somebody in the middle of a campaign cycle and somebody is freaking out because they're like, they have way more yard signs than us. I was driving down the highway and I saw 20 yard signs for your opponent.
Yeah.
Where's yours? We need to get yard signs up. Unless you're running a write-in campaign, yard signs are effectively worthless. They are what we call a vanity metric is something. It's a term that we use in the industry. It's not super popular, but in our circles, it's a term that we use. And a vanity metric is the type of thing that you tell a candidate to get them to shut up and stop panicking.
Yeah.
But if the candidate's on the same page, then the vanity metric is something that you tell a donor to get them to shut up and stop panicking. Or you tell your core supporters, your local committee or your volunteer base, or, the friendly neighbors that are, out there knocking for you or your volunteers or your supporters in some way, right? Either, at the committee level or just at the grassroots level. There are going to be people in those circles, God bless them, who their heart's in the right place and they've got a lot of time and energy to devote. And if you direct them in the right place, you can get some real results out of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're an expert in how the process works. So they will see things like a bunch of yard signs for your opponent and they'll start panicking. And so one of the ways that you calm them down is you just get your yard signs up in response and you just move on. But yard signs are something that everybody looks at. I promise you they're effectively worthless. So that's one thing. But there's some other things too. Quite frankly, social media is completely detached from reality. I don't care how many followers you have on Twitter. I don't care how many likes or retweets you got from your last tweet. How many of those people live in your district?
Yeah.
That's a good question. In Nick's case, we actually know a significant number of people live in his district, so it's not always completely disconnected. Nick has people that listen to him all over the world, especially on Instagram. Well, he doesn't have 1 million people in his district on it.
But the important distinction there too is that doesn't mean that the social media component isn't important once you're in office, right?
Yes.
It has different it has power for different things, but it's not the best indicator of whether or not you're going to win your election.
Yes, and so for example, it's actually great that Nick has the reach that he has because he can use that in order to reach more people once he's in office. Having a large social media presence helps for an incumbent on, like, once they're in office. But if you're talking about trying to analyze an election, again, having a bunch of retweets on Twitter does not necessarily mean that you're going to win. We know for a fact, because Twitter skews to the left, or at least it used to until Elon came along. We know for a fact that there's plenty of Democrats that would have, if Twitter decided elections, Bernie Sanders would be president right now.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's another thing.
I got to say, C. Trotter said, yard signs equal 50 door knocks, more effective than empty yards. I'm going to tell you right now, I'll make you a bet. You have two candidates. One puts out yard signs and the other one knocks 50 doors for every yard sign, and we'll see which candidate wins. I guarantee. In fact, we'll have it. All right. So one candidate just focuses on yard signs. The other candidate knocks 25 doors for every and the one that knocks doors will win.
C. Trotter, we actually can do this bet today because Nick is currently, his name is on the ballot today. He's running for re-election for his seat in the House of Delegates today. And I almost never leave my house. So take this with a grain of salt.
At least you're honest about it.
The few times that I do leave my house, I have never seen a single yard sign for Nick this entire election cycle. I don't think we're actually running an experiment this year where Nick has gone to the events. Obviously, you've gone to public events and stuff like that. You've talked to the committees, but Nick is running a campaign where he's not blasting his name out there in front of every street corner in the district saying, please vote for me. He doesn't have a million yard signs.
We've put more effort into other things rather than yard signs, and we've put a lot of effort into races that are incredibly competitive.
Yes, I was about to get to that. Yeah. And the reason why is because I don't want people to think that Nick is being lazy and not doing anything. Nick realizes he's going to win, and so he's been devoting his resources to races where it's actually going to be on the margins. Nick has gone multiple times out of district to other races because, and this gets into the reach thing, right? Yeah. Nick has such a huge audience, and there's a lot of people that don't live in his district, but you know what? There's a lot of people that listen to Nick that live in Northern Virginia or live in Hampton Roads or live in the Richmond metro area. So Nick has been campaigning in other parts of the state for our other candidates that are in really difficult races. So the experiment that we can run today is we can figure out what type of margin Nick is going to have on election night, because he doesn't really have a lot of yard signs up in his district. He's been spending more time campaigning in other districts where we need all the help that we can get rather than this one. Well, and again, I think he's going to get over 60% of the vote.
Well, and this is something too where it's like people almost get upset with us when we say this. And it's like, look, I'm not saying you can't have your yard sign. I'm not telling campaigns to not do yard signs. What I'm saying is that if you're serious about winning, then we should have a proper understanding of what their actual value is and what they represent. And there is no universe where a yard sign equals 50 door knocks. None. And anybody who tells me different, I'm going to look at them like, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to say that we've spent a lot of time. Let me put it this way. Most of the people that think that yard signs are super, super important have never had to run for office. They've never run for office.
Or worked for somebody,
or worked or intensely worked on a campaign or something like that, which means there's no price for them to be wrong. There's no price for them to be wrong. Once you are actually dedicating 12 hours a day of your life to actually getting elected to something, believe me, there's a huge price to be paid if you get it wrong on what the most effective campaigning is. So I will put it to you this way. You don't got to listen to me. You don't got to listen to Christian. You don't got to listen to any of it. You can just go with how it makes you feel. What I'm saying is that we have all been in positions where you pay a very high price for being wrong, which means we've dedicated a lot of time, effort, and money to not being wrong.
In retrospect, though, I'm very glad that we were all wrong in 2020 because we wouldn't be doing this podcast right now if Nick was in D.C. That actually gets to what metrics are out there.
So what matters? What actually
that
matters?
actually matters. So we've talked about this briefly earlier. Fundraising matters.
Yeah.
It is a must. If you have no money in the bank, you're going to lose. Now, you can still win if you're outspent.
Yes.
That happens, especially in Virginia. Democrats outspend us usually every single time. And guess what? We don't lose every single race. Now, we lose a lot, unfortunately, because it's Virginia, and it breaks our heart all the time. But Republicans can win elections in Virginia over and over and over again while being outspent. But guess what? They still have money too, right? You can be outspent and by 100,000, but if you're talking about $1 million, and some of these House of Delegates races are now in the millions of dollars, you have got to raise money. So fundraising is a huge component. The other thing, too, that's left out is the demographics of the district. And here's what I mean by this. And this actually gets me into a bone that I have to pick with some of the consultant people. There's so many consultant people that just don't know what era we're living in. They don't know what time it is.
Yeah.
They keep thinking this is the 1990s or the early 2000s. I'm sorry, white, college indoctrinated, not educated, indoctrinated suburban voters are not the Republican Party base. Just because your district voted for Mitt Romney by 5 points in 2012, in some upscale laptop class, I say this with a laptop in front of me, of course, because I'm a hypocrite. But this like. Those people, again, woke, college-educated, white suburbanites that went to Berkeley, they're not voting for us. Yeah. And yet consultants keep wanting to pander to those people. At some point, you have to ask yourself how on earth Massachusetts managed to conquer the entire world. Yeah. But there's so many consultants that think that, that's the target base. No, it's not. The target base, Republicans are increasingly becoming arguably a pan-racial working class party.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe it, we've done an episode on urban cities, right? In rural conservative countryside and then the purple suburbs. And the reddening that we've seen within some of these cities, the more racially diverse they are and the more blue collar these places are. This is why Houston is getting redder, but Austin is getting bluer. And so the demographics actually matter a lot because that tells us where a district is going. I don't care about the snapshot where it's at in the moment. I care about the trajectory.
Yeah.
Because a district, there's plenty of them out there. There's plenty of districts out there that voted for Obama by 5 points that are now safe Republican. And likewise, there's plenty of districts that over a decade ago voted for Mitt Romney by 5 points that are now safe Democrat because the coalitions have changed. We're in the middle of an electoral realignment. We're actually in the middle of an ideological realignment. It's not even just electoral at this point. Conservatives are finding people that, guess what? They're not really into transing their kids.
Yeah.
Right? They're not really into, dyeing their hair blue and using pronouns and talking about microaggressions and then lecturing us about Hamas or a bunch of decolonizers.
Yeah.
Right? The bases are in the process of shifting and people's ideology are in the process of shifting and none of us are immune to that.
Well, and to give everybody an idea kind of what is meant by that, the Democratic Party used to pride itself. So this actually kind of goes into some of the other things we've talked about with respect to critical theory, with respect to Marxism, with respect to leftism. Marx really started off as this idea is like the workers of the world unite. That is not the base of a leftist ideology, right? It's not the base of a Marxist ideology anymore. There's a reason why it was funny. Castro got invited, I think, to speak at Harvard, and he goes, "I speak at the universities because that's where the activists are. It's not in the barracks; it's in the universities." And if you see that, that's playing out within our electorate right now, where the like very wealthy corporate class, the heavily college educated, and the maybe like the super poor. To some degree, but even that is not
it's a top bottom coalition on the left.
The working class is not the Democrat Party's base anymore. In fact, there's kind of an open disdain for the working class. There's a couple questions in here. John Gates said, "Does yard signs equal fundraising?" No. It doesn't. The best fundraising, again, even the events you go to, like the $10,000 plate dinners and stuff like that. Not that I've never been to one of those, but you see like candidates for those can raise some money and stuff like that. But your typical event that you do, unless you're really good at it, you're not raising a lot of money. The best way that most candidates raise money is definitely not through yard signs. It's through phone calls and setting up meetings with people. That is how the vast majority of fundraising is done. A question: do you think the Crowders showing the Nashville Manifesto will change votes? I don't think so. Maybe I don't think so. unfortunately, because the first of all, I think most of the people that are voting one way on this, we weren't surprised by what the manifesto said. When I saw what was going on in the manifesto and that it was rooted in this whole idea of critical race theory and everything else, it was like, yep, that checks out. That makes perfect sense that was the motivation behind what the shooter.
There's a reason they didn't want to release it.
Yeah, there's a reason why they didn't want to release it. I guarantee you, if that person went in there talking about how they hated minorities, we would have had that access to that manifesto 15 seconds after the incident took place. But no, it had to be leaked out that, nope, it was rooted by basically someone that had been radicalized in concepts of critical race theory, like go figure. Anyway, and queer theory and critical theory in general and everything else. There was another question. I think I missed it here. Let me see. I'll try to get back to it later. I think the big thing that I would want people to kind of take away from this is that, one, if you're going to run for office, a couple of things to take into consideration. If you're going to run for office, think about what you're doing, why you're doing, what you're going to run for, what your district looks like. Understand the operational environment before you get in. Anybody that believes, Morton Blackwell, who's kind of a legend in conservative circles, he has his rules of politics. If you want to check it out, it's called the Leadership Institute. They actually do a lot of training for people that want to run for office, and it's incredibly good training, very, very relevant training. But one of the things he has in there is called the Sir Galahad approach to politics, and that is, my cause is just, therefore I will win. Garbage. Your cause can be just all day long. You can have a great message. You can have a great background. If you're not doing the fundamental things that are necessary in order to win, you're going to lose. And one of the most important things that you can do as the candidate is fundraise. And the reason for that is because people want to give to the candidate. Right? You can't have other people. You can have other people knock doors. You can have other people phone bank. You can have other people do, host events on your behalf. You're pretty much the only one that can really fundraise for you. And you have to spend a lot of time doing that. And so that is just one of the practical realities if you want to be successful. That doesn't mean that that's all you should focus on. Obviously, if you're not getting into this for the right reasons, and you are someone that just looks at this as a mechanism for, achieving power or whatnot, that's problematic. But understanding some of these kind of 101, like what are the things you need to know before you run for office. That's why we wanted to do this, because we've had a lot of questions on it. The other thing too, that's really important again is going into the whole idea of what are the accurate predictors of what's going to happen versus the popular predictors of what's going to happen. And again, I just want to reiterate this. I'm not saying yard signs are bad, right? Christian Mind. I'm not saying yard signs are bad. I'm not saying that they're not something that a campaign should do, but I think people should properly understand what actually works and what doesn't. And one of the things that's so frustrating about politics, I can tell you as someone that, again, has been in a position where the stakes are very high and we want to win, is the number of people. Politics is unlike any other profession. Nobody would walk into the middle of like somebody performing surgery and being like, I don't think you should do it that way. Or I really think this would work better. Like nobody does that. Right? People don't typically show up to a fire and be like, I don't know what these idiots are thinking trying to put out the fire this way. I would do it this way. In politics, I don't know what it is, but everybody seems to think that their instincts or what appeals to them is what would work. And I had somebody once at an event I was at, and they asked me, they're like, why aren't you doing this, and this in your campaign commercials? And I said, well, that's something that appeals to you. And he said, yes. I said, let me ask you something. I said, you're here tonight on a Saturday night at my fundraiser. Are you voting for me? Yeah. The ad wasn't supposed to convince you, because everyone that thinks the way you do is probably already voting for me. I said, if you want me to win, then you've got to trust that I'm focusing resources in the most intelligent way possible. And I can't get you to vote for me twice. I have to convince somebody that is wondering right now who they're going to vote for. I have to convince them that this is the right person to vote for, that I'm the right person to vote for. And the only way I can do that is if I'm focusing on the issues that they tell me are important to them. And to some degree, there needs to be not a lack of skepticism in who would put themselves forward to represent you. Definitely view that with skepticism. But when it comes to campaign strategy, what a lot of voters need to understand, what a lot of sometimes conservative activists need to understand or volunteers need to understand is we're not doing the things we're doing by accident. We're not doing them by accident. There's reason and there's data behind it, and there's and these are important things that need to take place if you're gonna win. And if you don't take them seriously, you lose. And the only thing I would say is that if you disagree with that, here's what I would ask you to do. If you disagree with what we're saying here, or you think we're just full of crap, here's what I would ask you to do. Volunteer more for some of these campaigns. Really spend some time getting in and volunteering for a campaign and understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it and the amount of time and effort that goes into everything and the amount of research that goes into everything. And I'm not saying that all campaigns get it right. And I'm certainly not saying the consultant class gets it right, because there's a lot of things consultants do that I think are just, quite frankly, shady. I think there's a lot of things consultants do that are all about lining their own pockets as opposed to actually getting the best bang for your buck. But when we say this stuff, and we're not benefiting monetarily by sharing this information, right? When we say this stuff, it's decades of experience looking at what works and what doesn't work, with our motivation being we want to convince the right person to run. And we want them to go in with their eyes wide open about what that means for them, what that means for their family, and then set them up for success when they do it. And the reason why we talk about the indicators that matter and the indicators that don't matter is because we also want voters to be smart about this sort of stuff. One of the reasons why voters are so frustrated about what's going on right now is because, honestly, they're kept in the dark about what goes on behind the scenes, both from the campaign side and from the political side. There's so much stuff that is hidden from voters because we think they either don't care or they don't want to know or they wouldn't understand. And it's a little bit insulting, right? It's a little bit insulting. But when we come forward and we say, this is what's really going on and this is why, right? And people tell us, oh, no, that's ridiculous. Okay, based on what? Please tell me based on what we're saying is ridiculous. Right. So that's the spirit in which this is given. The spirit in which this is given is to inform people on what does it actually take? Why are there certain things done the way that they're done? And how can you have a greater impact either as a candidate or as a volunteer or as just a voter? Because the more you know about this, the more you're going to be able to equip yourself to make better decisions about the people that represent you. And if you're someone that's going to volunteer, you can make better decisions about what is actually worth your time and what is not. And what is not. So I hope all of you found that helpful. We're not going to go super long today because, again, I got to get out there. But I want to thank everybody for watching. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully the people that requested that we talk about this subject matter in our community chat have also found it useful. I hope we answered the question for you.
Before you go, we need to, for anybody that's listening to this that lives in Virginia, please go and vote today. The modeling that I came up with is showing that, like, the House of Delegates could literally be decided. I'm not even joking. It could literally be decided by 500 votes or less in like 1 or 2 districts. If you live in anywhere in Northern Virginia, the Richmond metro area, or South Side, like Hampton Roads, Chesapeake, Suffolk, like anywhere in the Hampton Roads area. Honestly, if you live anywhere in Virginia at all, please go and vote today. Control of our state legislature is more likely than not going to be decided by 1,000 votes or less in just a couple of districts. So I'm very skeptical about democracy at the federal level. We've done podcasts on it. I'm very, very pessimistic about DC, but I've said before, and I'll say it again, states are going to be in position to play a major role and I think saving this country. And if you want your state to play a part in it, you need to be active at the state level. Stop paying attention to what Congress is doing or what the White House is doing and start paying attention to what your state legislatures are doing, because they can impact you way more than Washington, D.C. can. The thing that came out of China a few years ago is proof of this, and the lockdowns that follow.
Yeah, the nondescript thing that came out of a nondescript country somewhere in a different hemisphere. Yeah. Well, hey, listen, once again, thank you for joining.
And Nick will win.
Yeah, thanks again. Appreciate you guys. And also, once again, want to remind everybody, because we got the holiday season coming up, gift boxes from Good Ranchers. And if you want to try it for yourself first, just to confirm what all the hype is about, $15 off when you use promo code Nick. That's $15 off. That's free shipping. Plus, you're going to get to pick free top sirloin or chicken breasts or wild-caught salmon or bacon, which, again, you can use to wrap pretty much everything else in. So go ahead and use promo code Nick. Thank you to Good Ranchers for sponsoring us. Thank you to watching, and we will see you next episode.